Yeah, have you ever wondered why some people seem to experience deep and authentic joy in their daily lives, even during some of the most trying times, and others just can't seem to find joy no matter how hard they search for it? I read this week about a receptionist who had a serious case of the grumpies. A man going into the doctor's office tells the receptionist that he has this sore on his chin, and he'd like the doctor to take a look at it. Well, the receptionist says, go down the hall, take the first door on the right, take off your clothes. It's like, it's on my chin. I don't really think all that's necessary. Down the hall, first door on the right, take off your clothes. And he starts to say but again, but she just snaps again. Down the hall, first door on the right, take off your clothes. So finally, whatever, I'll go down there. He walks down the hall, takes the first door on the right, and there's another guy in there, sitting there on the table, shivering in his boxer shorts. So he says, can you believe this receptionist? I just got this little sore in my chin. And she's like, down the hall, first door on the right, take off your clothes. And he says, you think that's bad? I'm just the UPS guy. I think she could use a little bit more joy in her life. How about you? Do you need a little bit more joy in your daily grind? You know, like I said last Sunday, the Bible has a lot to say about happiness. It speaks of this indomitable joy as a fruit of God's Spirit that just wells up in the life of a believer. It's joy that runs deeper and stronger because it's anchored not in our circumstances or in our successes or what's going on in our life, but in the love of God and the person of Jesus Christ. And the Apostle Paul has a lot to say about that kind of joy. And even though he was in chains 24 hours a day, awaiting trial and possible execution, Paul wrote this letter to the Philippians that just radiates joy. The words joy or rejoice appear no less than 16 times in just 4 short chapters. And the whole theme of the book, I think, is summed up in Philippians 4, verse 4, where he writes, always be joyful in the Lord. I'll say it again, be joyful. So regardless of his circumstances and what was going on in his life, Paul rejoiced. He was happy. And last Sunday, we surveyed the first chapter of Philippians, where Paul reveals that by focusing on partnerships, his relationship with the church and others, focusing on the positive, looking for the bright side and the silver lining in things, and by focusing on his purpose, Paul was able to experience joy even in the midst of the worst possible situation. And I think that we can experience that same joy. Now, as we step into chapter 2, Paul reveals 3 more bringers of joy, the first of which is solidarity. Solidarity. Paul opens this second chapter of Philippians with a series of questions. In verse 1 through 2, he says, does your life in Christ give you strength? Does his love comfort you? Do we share together in the Spirit? Do you have mercy and kindness? If so, make me very happy by having the same thoughts, sharing the same love, and having one mind and purpose. See, for Paul, the church just living in harmony, loving one another, and working together with one mind and one purpose made him very happy. Another translation says, truly happy. And that kind of solidarity, the fellowship and the unity that comes from having this shared purpose and this shared passion, I think can fill our hearts with just as much happiness as it did his. This time of year, you're likely to see geese flying south for the winter. And I think the church could learn some valuable lessons from these geese if you watch them flying. Winging their way to a warmer climate, they often cover thousands of miles before reaching their destination. And it's fascinating, at least it was to me, to read and discover some of what we've learned about their flight patterns and their in-flight habits. 4 of them come to mind related to our solidarity as a church. First, by flying as they do in that V formation that you'll see them in usually, the members of the flock create an upward current for one another. Each flap of their wings literally lifts the bird behind them, immediately behind them. And so by flying in that V formation, the whole flock gets 71% greater flying range. They can go further with less energy than if they were flying on their own. Secondly, those in front rotate their leadership. Most of the pressure is on the goose at the front of the V. But when he gets tired, he can rotate back and another goose will slide in that position, and so they keep each other from getting wore out. Third, when one goose gets sick or wounded, two others will fall out of formation and follow it down to the ground, and they'll stay there with it to protect it and help it. And they stay with that struggler until it's able to fly again, and then they'll either catch up to their formation or they'll just fall into another formation. Fourth, the geese in the rear of the formation are the ones that are always doing all the honking. You hear them honking as they pass by overhead. It's the ones in the back that are honking, and they do it to push and to motivate and to encourage the ones that are off in front of them. It's their way of saying, yeah, we're here, we're with you, we're following behind you, and it just keeps the ones in front going. It's just the natural instinct of these geese to work together. Whether it's rotating or flapping or helping or simply honking, the flock is in it together, which enables them to accomplish what they set out to do and to get where they set out to go. And that's the kind of fellowship that I think Paul wants to see in the church. As Christians, we all have a shared destination. We all want to get to heaven. We want to spend our eternity with Jesus. And we have a common purpose, to glorify God in our lives along the way. And we can reach that destination, we can accomplish that purpose easier and better when we fly in formation. When we encourage one another, when we stand by one another. A harmonious church that works together and encourages and stands with is a happy church. And so solidarity is the first joy bringer that Paul mentions in this chapter. Another is selflessness. He mentions selflessness. Leonard Bernstein was once asked, what instrument is the most difficult to play? And he thought for a minute, and then he replied, the second fiddle. Yeah, I can get plenty of first violinists, but finding someone to play second fiddle with enthusiasm, that's tough. And none of us, I think, like to play second fiddle to somebody else. But the truth is, putting others first can be a tremendous source of joy in our lives. Believe it or not, you experience an actual chemical reaction whenever you do something kind for another person. Dr. David Hamilton, PhD, has studied the side effects of kindness, and he found that when we do something kind for another person, it causes elevated levels of dopamine in the brain, which is sort of like the brain's natural version of morphine or even heroin, some people have compared it to. And so we get this natural high, sometimes referred to as a helper's high. In other words, when you do something nice for somebody, it makes you happy. You feel good about it. And that's actually the way that our brains are wired. Now, do you think God wired us that way on purpose? I do. And I think Paul would have agreed. In the next couple of verses, he writes in verse 3 and 4, don't be selfish. Don't try to impress others. Be humble, thinking of others as better than yourselves. Don't look out for your own interests, but take an interest in others too. Don't look out only for your own interests, but take an interest in others too. One of the greatest players in NBA history practiced this verse throughout his entire basketball career. When Irving Johnson was still in junior high school, his basketball talent was already obvious. He was so much better than all of the other junior high kids on his team that he was scoring like 50 points a night, and the rest of the team would get like 5 or 10 combined. And of course, they're winning every game, which is great, but the team is deflated. They're not really happy about the situation, and neither were the rest of the parents, for that matter. And so at that early age, Irving decided to change the way he played the game. Instead of shooting every chance that he got, he would become an enabler. Always looking for the open man, passing the ball in order to make the other players look good. And this became a passion of his that he carried with him into the NBA, where he became known as Magic Johnson. And in 1984, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar had the opportunity to break the NBA's all-time scoring record, which was at the time held by Wilt Chamberlain. And on the night that Kareem had the chance to sink that record-breaking basket, Magic Johnson got off the bench, put himself into the game, and he walked up to Kareem and he told him, "You can do it, and I want to be the guy that passes you the ball when you make that shot." And with about 9 minutes left in the game, Magic Johnson passed the ball to his 7'2" teammate, and Abdul-Jabbar scored his 22nd point of the night and 31,420th point of his career, breaking the all-time record. And the game came to a halt as Abdul-Jabbar's teammates, rushed to congratulate him. Fans gave him a standing ovation, and Magic Johnson just leapt into his arms, and the two of them hugged on the middle of the court that night. And if you look closely at the tape, you'll see tears of joy streaming down Magic Johnson's face because of his teammates' accomplishment. Coach Pat Riley said of Magic, "He's the most unselfish basketball player I've ever seen." And you know what? I'll bet he was pretty happy that night too. It's a paradox, I think. The more we focus on the joy of others, the more joy we have ourselves. It's not something that diminishes when you give it away. In fact, it multiplies. When you give joy to one person, you experience it yourself. And so solidarity and selflessness are two sources of joy. But Paul offers another way to experience more joy in life, and that's by shining. And I'll let Paul explain that to you himself. He says in verse 14 through 18, "Do everything without complaining or arguing. Then you will be innocent and without any wrong. You will be God's children without fault. But you are living with crooked and mean people all around you, among whom you shine like stars in the dark world. You offer the teaching that gives life. So when Christ comes again, I can be happy because my work was not wasted. I will be happy and full of joy with all of you. And you also should be happy and full of joy with me." See, Paul knew that when Christ comes again, the Philippian church would be joining him in heaven. Because he shared Jesus with them, they were eternally saved, and they'd have this everlasting life. And that knowledge filled Paul's heart with joy and with happiness. And Paul wanted the Philippians to experience that same joy and happiness with him. So how did they do that? How can you and I do that? Well, like he says, by shining like stars in the dark world and offering the teaching that gives life. In other words, through our own Christian life and testimony, we can share Jesus and share salvation with the people that we know and we care about and that we want to see in heaven with us. Jesus spoke about shining in Matthew 5, verse 15 and 16. He says, "No one lights a lamp and puts it under a basket. Instead, everyone who lights a lamp puts it on the lampstand, and then its light shines on everyone in the house. In the same way, let your light shine in front of people. Then they will see the good that you do and praise your Father in heaven." One of my favorite hymns is a song titled, "Let the Lower Lights Be Burning." It's a song with a story behind it. Dwight L. Moody was preaching, and he told the story of a violent storm on Lake Erie. On a dark and stormy night, Moody recalled, when the waves rolled like mountains and not a star could be seen, a boat neared the Cleveland harbor, rocking and plunging in the waves. The captain and the pilot could see the light from the lighthouse, but the lower lights that were placed all along the shore had gone out. They didn't really have any other options, though, so with a strong hand and a brave heart, the old pilot guided the boat. But in the darkness, he missed the channel and crashed into the rocks. The boat was slivered, and the entire crew lost their lives that night. Sitting in one of the pews listening to Moody tell that story was composer Philip Bliss. And inspired by that true story, Philip wrote the enduring hymn, "Let the lower lights be burning," the opening stanza of which proclaims, "Brightly beams our Father's mercy from His lighthouse evermore, but to us He gives the keeping of the lights along the shore." See, Jesus may be the everlasting light, but we are no less the light of the world, the lower lights that guide people to Him and to safe harbor. And when we live our faith and when we share our faith with those around us, we become those lower lights, those stars shining in a dark world. And we can point people to Jesus. And honestly, I mean, what could bring greater joy than knowing that you helped guide someone that you know, someone that you love, into the arms of Jesus in everlasting life? You know, we all have bad days and bad moods from time to time. And I think we could all use a little more joy in our lives. And so I'm thankful that through solidarity and selflessness and shining a light for Jesus, that our hearts can be filled with joy. And so I want to encourage you again this week to choose joy. Intentionally look for opportunities to be selfless and to shine for Jesus. And you know, if you're not a part of a church family, if you don't have a membership anywhere, then I want to invite you to experience the fellowship and the joy that comes through solidarity here at the Grove. Next week, we'll delve a little bit deeper into Philippians, and we'll see what else we can learn about joy. But in the meantime, if you could use a little boost of joy, since the joy is a fruit of God's Spirit, one of the best ways to experience it is simply by asking Him to fill you with His Spirit. Jesus invites us to do that. He says, "Ask, and the Father will generously give the Spirit to those who ask of Him." And so as we stand and sing, I want to encourage you, if you need a little bit more joy, to stand and pray. You know, ask God to fill you with His Spirit and wait for Him to do so. Let's stand and sing together, church.